Okay, so we're going to discuss the origins of the apocalypse. And let me say before we start that what I'm going to go over in this presentation, which is going to be just like definitions of the apocalypse and the difference between apocalypse and eschatology. It's very, very complex. So what I do here is very generalized. So it's just to give you a framework to understand the rest of the class and where we're going from here. So the classic definition of apocalypse, and you're probably not familiar with this, is to reveal something, to lift a veil, to shed light on something. Apocalypticism, on the other hand, is the study of the apocalypse, a worldview that we as humans are not capable of understanding the esoteric nature of life, and that soon it will be revealed. A modern apocalypse, and when I say modern, I mean anything occurring after 1945, we start seeing a change because now all of a sudden it is not just the end of the world because of God or because of some religious prophecy. It now could be a cataclysmic event that is precipitated by nature or God or man or a combination of one or the other. And it can be, it doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world. It could mean a region, a territory, even a personal apocalypse. An example would be things that are called apocalypse now, a tsunami, a nuclear meltdown, and I'm thinking of Fukushima, which took place, I believe, in 2011 in Japan. Eschatology, this is another word you're going to learn. Eschatology is just exactly refers to theories about the end of the world. How is it going to end? Different religions believe it's going to end in different ways. And of course, this is getting back to generally eschatology has to do with a religious belief or some sort of other spiritual belief. So in this presentation, we're going to look at essentially the monotheistic religions, how they theorize the end of the world will happen, and the differences between the two, because essentially that's what created our construct of the idea of apocalypse and how the world is going to end. And even if you're not aware of it, we see it in very, very subtle ways, especially in our Western culture. So one of the issues that eschatology grapples with is there an afterlife, or when you die, do you just absolutely that's the end? Is there a Messiah? Is there a leader? And of course, the monotheistic religions have their leaders. We know that a Messiah is coming. In Judaism, of course, Christians believe that Christ is the Messiah. And in Islamic religions, they believe that it's Muhammad. So what exactly is the difference between apocalypse versus eschatology? Well, eschatology deals exactly with how our world will end. That's the discussion. Apocalypse explores more of the meaning of the event. It lifts the veil. It enlightens us. If you think about a veil over your face, you pick it up, all of a sudden you can see the light. So that's really the difference in how they both sort of interrelate to one another. In Jewish eschatology, we have a phrase that is Harit Hayamim, and this is a term for basically end of days for Jewish eschatology. There's a Talmud quote in the Talmud from a sage that says, May I not live to see the end of days. So he's inferring that the end of days are so horrible that we wouldn't want to be around. So essentially, the end of days, and again, this is very generalized, we see some things that we're going to see repeated in other monotheistic religions. So the Jewish exiles return to Israel. We've seen that happen a few times in history. The battle of Armageddon, where the Messiah fights evil. The Messiah becomes the king of Israel, and in the year 6000, we have a great era of tranquility, world peace, and everything is going to be good, except then it will come to an end. Now, what's interesting in Jewish eschatology is they do believe that all dead will be resurrected into another world. Even the sinners, unlike, of course, Christianity, where sinners are doomed to hell. So they're not exactly resurrected. This is kind of interesting. I love the history behind this. This is Mount Megiddo, and it is the place where the Battle of Armageddon allegedly will take place. There's been other battles here, matter of fact, and this is next time you're playing Trivial Pursuit, if this comes up. The Turks battled the Egyptians around World War I on this mountain also. So it's a very famous mountaintop. I love this image because on the, it's a bird's eye view, and on the right side you can see all sorts of modern traffic driving past this. This is on top of Mount Megiddo in present day. Possibly someone in the class might have gone and visited this, so this is kind of interesting. The Hebrew Bible, first Enoch, I said that the wrong way, it's Enoch actually, is a famous apocalyptic text from, I say BCE, before Common Era, long time ago. And what's interesting about this is one of the very, very few apocalyptic texts. Of course, it wasn't called an apocalyptic text at the time, but in this text, you do have this apocalyptic story with the conflict between good and evil, the fight, of course, the Messiah wins, and you have the images of something that's satanic, the bad person, Hades, the heaven and hell, angels, the fallen angels, which of course in Christianity, Satan supposedly was an angel at one time. And notice it's from Greek mythology. A lot of ancient apocalyptic beliefs do originate from pagan beliefs and Greek and all sorts of other things. But again, that's kind of complicated, so we won't get into it. The second most well-known book that presages an apocalypse in the Hebrew Bible and also the Old Testament is the book of Daniel. And this, we don't know when it was written, but we assume, which is sort of around the same period as the book of Enoch, was written 215, 164 before Common Era. Here we have a revelation. Daniel has a revelation and sees the rise and the fall of these kingdoms. We see this story over and over and over again, lots of similarities. Beasts, all sorts of metaphors for beasts and heavenly creatures. And then there's the final battle between the Messiah and two kings, but we assume one is bad and one is good. This is what students usually do when they take my classes. I don't know how that got in there. Anyway, let's take a look at Islamic eschatology. They also believe in a judgment day, much the same as the Jewish religion and the Christianity, which we'll get to a little bit later. Um, they believe in a judgment day where man will have to answer for all of the bad, evil things that he's done. The righteous will go to heaven, the dead are resurrected, and the bad will be punished in an evil hell. A little bit different than Judaism, a little more um, doomsday or so. So, it certainly uh, is a good idea to try to be a good person and live up to the law of Islam if you don't want to end up burning in hell. And what's interesting about Islamic eschatology, unlike Judaism, is that Jesus is considered a very important prophet, and he works side by side with Muhammad, who is the Messiah of the Islamic religion. And together they restore peace on earth. Their version of the Bible, of course, is the Quran. They also believe in a heaven, hell, and a resurrection of the dead. This is the end of days. The sign is when Muhammad appears. This is their savior, their Messiah, very similar to Christianity. I threw Buddhist eschatology in here because it is kind of interesting that even though, Buddhism is not a monotheistic religion, they still have beliefs in terms of like the world coming to an end at some point and beginning again, sort of recharging. And here you can read it on the slide. They believe in 10 immoral concepts that are sort of like signs of the end of the middle time, signs of this corruption and sort of society crumbling. And if you take a look at them, you'll notice that most of them are things that if you happen to be Christian, or even if you're not Christian, you've probably heard of the 7 deadly sins, which contain things that are very similar to this: greed, lust, covetousness, theft, lying, etc., etc. And then, of course, you have what would be the equivalent, although it's a very, very different spiritual system, the Maitreya, which is the Buddhist sort of Messiah. Hindu eschatology, very similar to not only the monotheistic religions, but also Buddhism. You have a cycle going on, and things go well, and all of a sudden the world falls into chaos and degradation. You see things that appear, same as in Buddhism, that sort of resemble the 7 deadly sins. Greed is one we always see, and of course, perversity, which could include, sexual perversity or, coveting thy neighbor's wife, adultery, etc., etc. Interestingly enough, they believe that time, and actually they believe it's cyclical, and actually some of the monotheistic religions infer that time is cyclical also, although they don't say it's going to happen over and over again. So there's definitely, it continues over and over again. There's always renewal and rebirth in the eschatological belief in Hinduism. And finally, we get to Christian eschatology. And here we look at the book of Revelations, and you're reading about that in the first unit. It's sometimes known as the Apocalypse of John. It's believed, although it can't be proven, that somebody named John the Apostle wrote the book, although it's very likely that he didn't, because it was very common back in those days, which would have been around 50 to 70 AD. It was very common for people to write things and give the wrong names on the writing. So we really don't know who wrote it. In any case, here in Christian eschatology, the book of Revelation presages, or I should say that allegedly John did this. He was a prophet. He had a revelation on the island of Patmos where he was exiled because the Roman authorities during the time threw him out of the Roman Empire, and that was a very common thing for people to do. In any case, he had a revelation that there would be a war between good and evil that culminated in Armageddon, which was the war between the Messiah, and in this case, of course, it's Christ, and the enemy in this case was the Antichrist, the fallen angel. And in this story, the Messiah wins, the saved go to heaven. So Christ is sort of like the superhero. He saves the good people. They're granted eternal life. And all the non-believers and the bad people burn in eternal hell. I like to call the book of Revelations probably one of the first modern horror stories. It's really, it reads like a Stephen King novel. It's very, very scary. And if you think about it, until the birth of publishing in the 16th century, mass publishing, this is what people read for entertainment, at least in European nations and Christian nations. So it's a story full of all sorts of metaphor. And actually, the other interesting thing about it is that scholars who study the Bible believe that John, or whoever it was who wrote this book, was actually criticizing the Roman Empire for persecuting the Jews during the days of Jesus, and they also, to some extent, they imprisoned him, they exiled him, so he had a beef with the Roman Empire. This is a painting by a Russian artist. It was painted in 1887, Viktor Vaznetsov. It is a representation of the four horsemen of the Apocalypse, which also appear in, of course, the book of Revelations. I'm sure many of you have heard of this. I understand it's appeared in video games and probably, anime, cartoons, all sorts of things. And a lot of the things that you read about in the book of Revelations, actually in modern day, the symbolism does appear in a lot of entertainment media. So let's take a look at what the horses mean. The white horse, to the right, is argued by scholars on the meaning of it. Some believe that it means conquest, and others believe it's pestilence. Of course, it's white, so it's very possible it's conquest. The red horse supposedly symbolizes war. The black horse symbolizes famine, and the pale horse, not surprisingly, symbolizes death, since there's a skeleton sitting on there. And of course, in the picture, you see the angels flying above, and you see the other people falling, the non-believers. And what's interesting about this is you'll notice that there's columns falling to the right. You see a Roman helmet. So obviously, they're killing the Romans. And of course, God appears as a lamb in the top center and reading the book of Revelations. And this is a representation of what's supposed to happen, according to the book of Revelations, during the rapture. And you're going to see that film. The good people, the believers, shoot up. They fly up to the sky. And the bad people, the non-believers, stay below. And that's when the four horsemen come along and do all sorts of, horrible things, spread disease, horrible insects, locusts, etc., sickness, all sorts of horrible things. in conclusion, what I would like to say is that I think that this dog really did go to heaven and was not left behind. I just realized that the image says, please do not copy. So I'll probably go to hell for using this in my slide presentation. This concludes the presentation.